All right. Welcome everyone to the Managing Human Factor and Self-Assessment webinar. My name is Justin Fischer. I'll be working in the background with Rajuta from Safelanes, taking care of the back end of things for you, making sure everything runs smoothly. If you do have any questions throughout, please use the Q&A box down at the bottom. If you have any statements or you want to answer questions, the chat box would work best for that. Yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into this. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Rob Fischer and Mr. Ratchet Jain to tell you a little bit about who we are and why we're all here.
Thanks, Justin. We appreciate everybody being here today. Ratchet, you want to introduce Safelanes, tell people a little bit about what you do, and then I'll talk a little bit about FIT. And since this is a webinar on human error, we'll go ahead and unmute when we do it.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Ratchet Jain. I'm working with Safelanes, where we expertise in delivering marine quality assurance services. We are working with over 100 plus ship owners and managers, enhancing their safety management system and processes. We have joined hands with the Fischer Improvement Technologies, who have not only trained all our team members on understanding of human factor, but also guide us to embed human factor in all our service offerings. And now, with the recent focus of oil majors and OCIMF on human factor, we see a need to create a better awareness on the understanding of managing human factor and its integration into companies' management system. So in today's webinar, which is the first session of our webinar series, we talked through on the overview of OCIMF's information paper on human factor management and self-assessment. But before we go further, I will hand over to Rob to give his brief introduction. Rob, thank you.
Thanks, Ratchet. I appreciate that. Well, my name's Rob Fischer. I own a company called Fischer Improvement Technologies. We've spent the last 30 years helping organizations and individuals understand how and why people make mistakes or human factors. And you can only do three things with mistakes or errors. You can prevent some, you can mitigate their consequences, or you can reduce their probability. So we've deployed in over 300 companies over these 30 years and have had well over 300,000 students go through our program on how to understand human factors in a way that minimizes risk, that reduces probability, that gives you better investigations, that ensures that your procedures are good. So it was exciting for our company, Fischer Improvement Technologies, to partner up with Safelanes, really one of the premier consulting firms in the shipping industry, to bring our experience in understanding human factors over multiple high-risk industries, nuclear, airlines, petrochemical, oil and gas, utilities, mining, refining, the list goes on and on. So when we partner those areas up, we get the intimate knowledge of the maritime industry from Safelanes and the huge experience of Fischer Improvement Technologies on human factors. So we have with us today Ian Collins, one of our senior consultants who is down in the Pacific Rim. And we've also got Ray Fischer online with us today. And we've got a couple of great captains, especially I want to turn over to Captain Vijay and just let him give us some reasoning from his perspective as a captain on what human factors can really do for us if we do it right. And since he started going through the human factors programs that help understand errors. So Captain, if you would just kind of give us some of your personal input on why you think it's important that we go this route.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And nice to see you here. Yeah, and I would since we are talking about humans, so let's first see how humans behave, So I remember from my sailing days, it was a very common scenario. Prior heading home, whenever a crew member gets a chance, all these guys will go ashore and they will buy some gifts or they will buy some toys, especially for their kids. And when they come back and people are discussing with them that why you all didn't buy the same toy, each one has bought a different toy. And they used to explain, this is what my kid likes. And this is how my kids, liking is. And so it was a great lesson to learn that, while the task here is that the kid has to play with the toy. And the kid is the center of that task. So he has actually kept the kid in the mind while buying the toy. And that's why he happens to buy the right toy for the kid, even though the kid is not around. And that comes to another thinking of mine is in 1995, when I first joined Sea, and we sailed out and we were asked, I was asked to assist, I was a cadet to assist few of my crew members in securing the gangway or the accommodation ladder, which we call. And I found that, a crew member has to wear a work life vest and then go on that gangway, because it had foldable railings, which had to be unfolded. Prior it is taken up and secured. And there was some moment during the time when he is walking on that gangway, when there is no railing on the either side and is exposed, and there can be external factors added to that. And it took almost a decade after I saw on one vessel where there is a permanent gangway rigged on the main deck, which by use of some sheaves and wires and engineering design has been placed in such a manner that one crew member can come and rig it, just slide it outside and take it inside without being exposed to sea or walking on a platform where there is no side railings. And that is when I thought that someone on the ship, while the designing was being done, thought about the person who's going to work on the gangway and his safety. And it not only improved the safety part, it also helped us in rest hours. Earlier we would require crew to come for 45 minutes before or 1 hour before to rig this gangway, And here one just can come 10, 15 minutes before and rig it in and out without, and we mitigated a great amount of risk in that, So that's it. Over to you, Rob.
Well, thank you very much for that. And it's always good to understand that we have a personal story involved in really deploying human factors. So we're going to be talking a little bit about understanding human factors and why we need to really understand them from the perspective of many high-risk industries and what influence these human factors have on safe operations, and then how we can practically apply some, and then some human factors KPIs. We're going to do a pretty broad brush today, and we're planning on 3 additional webinars, and they'll go a little bit deeper each time into managing human factors and how you self-assess. But we have we understand that traditional human factors is about how humans interface with things, and human performance or human error reduction is about this person on this task at this time. Very similar to what Captain Vijay was talking about, and how they interact with the system. And when we move into high-risk industries, we're trying to give the people the opportunity to see risk coming, to identify their vulnerabilities before that vulnerability turns into an error or some kind of incident or event. So as we created what we call the task-based system, it allows organizations to take a systems approach, and then we wrap that around the essential leadership cycle, which helps the leaders understand what's going on in human factors. One of the reasons I wanted to have Ian Collins on this webinar was, I spend a lot of my time with senior leaders, and it's been a while since I was, out in the field. But Ian has some very recent and just a huge amount of experience with this systems approach and how you go from the what of human factors into the hows, the whys, and really how you integrate those concepts. So, Ian, if you wouldn't mind just kind of describing what your experience has been with the systems approach, I think everybody would appreciate that boots on the ground perspective.
Appreciate that, Robin. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And the systems approach was certainly a new concept to me when I started first learning about the human factor and human elements, and maybe to give it some context where it all comes from. And it really developed in the aftermath of a couple of big nuclear incidents where people named, blamed, and shamed the person at the panel that day. But in reality, they were following their procedure, they were following the training. And it was just that the panel was incorrectly wired that led to these major nuclear catastrophic outcomes. And when we name, blame, and shame someone, it doesn't allow us the opportunity to really understand what had that action make sense to that person at the time. So this systems approach is really looking at how on any given task at any given time, we are influenced by elements around us, other people, other programs, processes, the work environment, the organization, and the equipment. You can think about it, I like to think about it like a car. And like a Formula One driver, they're ultimately the person that's performing and trying to win that race. But if their pit crew is not performing, if they make a mistake, if the track conditions change, the environment changes, it impacts that person's performance. If the sponsors don't give enough money, they might not get the equipment that can really help them win. So this systems approach is all about understanding how these elements impact performance. Like Rob mentioned, I've been out there in the field. I come from an oil and gas background myself, but have worked now with a lot of oil and gas companies, a lot of mining companies, nuclear, aviation. Wherever there is risk, we can apply the human performance and the human factors to understand how our systems are impacting people's performance out there. We used to have, I went from drilling operations and shifted into safety. And whenever we would have an incident or a bad outcome, there was a number of times when we thought this is very similar to something that happened 18 months ago. And that old sort of philosophy of why didn't they do it? That person's an idiot. Everyone knows you don't do that. And those sort of statements, that never gives us the opportunity to understand what was going on at the time that person was taking that action, that had it make sense to them. Because if they knew whatever action they were about to take would lead to some sort of bad outcome, they would never take it. And so this human element, the human performance is all about understanding what is it that has things make sense to people. And that's ultimately what the systems approach is all about. Now, do we want to make sure that that person that's influenced by all these systems is the best equipped that they can be to do their task? Absolutely. But we want to understand how the influence of the elements that surround them, what is their role in impacting and influencing that person's performance. So that's just a bit of background in terms of what this systems approach is all about. And I'll leave you with Deming, the father of quality management, said it best. When he said 90% of events are caused by something other than just the individual. It doesn't take the individual away, but what he's saying is that most of our events are from poorly designed systems. And he said a bad system will beat a good person every time. Human performance is all about recognizing where we're vulnerable, where are those vulnerabilities or those flaws or those weak points in our systems, and going to work at fixing those so that we can put anyone in a task and they're going to have a good outcome. It's all about making it easier to get right and harder to get it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great intro. That whole easier to get it right and harder to get it wrong. Easier to do, we got to make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. And that's what human factors really helps with. Captain Rahim, why is it that you think Maritime ought to really engage a previously proven approach instead of just going off on your own and trying to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, thanks, Ian and Rob. Good day, everyone. Before I discuss interesting views on science-based approach, a little info about myself. I'm Captain Sheikh Rahim. After spending over 36 years in ExxonMobil, I joined Safelanes last year. I've had a long span sailing as master. Since coming ashore during last 24 years, I worked in Marine Quality Assurance Group in various different interesting roles, including opportunities to work in OCUM for over 7.5 years on secondment. Now, coming back to talk about why it is necessary to apply a previously proven approach in the maritime industry. Even though the marine regulations, vessel inspections, and management self-assessment programs help to improve the vessel safety management system, the maritime incident trend continued to show contribution of human errors in over 75 cases, 75% of the cases. So there is a need to analyze things beyond human errors, not only during an investigation, but also when conducting the root cause analysis of any findings arising from audits and inspections. So there is a need to look into systems and conditions to see what caused that error, what caused that mistakes. So this now leads to another interesting topics. I'm now looking at Rachit. In your views, how human factor can contribute to prevent incidents and improve things? Rachit, over to you.
Thanks, Cameron. So, almost every company has adopted incident investigation methodology for assessing their high potential near misses and accidents. However, in most cases, the investigation ends at identifying human error, delivering additional training, or introducing some new procedures. So the implementation of human factors would help us to look beyond human errors, which will assist in reducing high consequence incidents or loss of process safety. The understanding and effective implementation of a human factor would help us to not only improve our efficiency at work, but also helps to safely perform safety critical operations on board vessels. Rob, human factor management and self-assessment provides a framework for its proper application. How this could be consistently applied? Maybe you can throw some of your expertise here.
Yeah, thanks, Ratchet. You're absolutely right, and I appreciate that segue, because when you think about a traditional investigations, we try to find what's wrong, but as you said, Ratchet, you and I have reviewed many maritime incidents to this point, and they're just too often, let's just say it that way, they stop at human error or something in close proximity to human error. But if you're taking notes on this webinar, you may want to write something down, and that is that you cannot correct your way to excellence. You have to prevent your way to excellence. So human factors in a consistent, practical application of the tools that reduce human error has to come in when you also, let's prevent or mitigate human errors, and let's also learn how to analyze human errors in a way that we actually learn as an organization. Because someone said earlier, and it's very true, the more you practically apply human factors on the front end, the less you're constantly saying, that's just like an event that happened 8 months ago. That's just like an event that happened on another vessel. I thought we learned that lesson before because we sent out a memo. So the consistent application and measuring helps us really understand what we call systemic drivers. And again, Ian's a champion of understanding systemic drivers to prevent events. And so we've established that framework, that measurement. And Captain Rahim, I mean, do you think that the maritime industry can actually learn from our over 300 deployments of these concepts?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yes, definitely. I think there is a need to apply learning from our previous deployment, previous analysis, previous experiences. It is always good to apply and learn from there. And that is a way, I think, going forward, I think, we can make improvement. So the main stream of shipping has evolved over the years. In 1996, the introduction of SIRE helped to focus on facilities and equipment. In 2004, TMSA was introduced to focus on management system. But though SIRE and TMSA have helped to reduce number of incidents, the industry is still experiencing many concerning incidents. And the trend analysis highlights that the greater need to focus on human factors. The human factor management and self-assessment provides a complete framework to address human factor issues. And this is a work, of over 3.5 years of work, I think, has gone into this, involving the internal and external expertise in developing this paper. So the human factor management and self-assessment provides a complete framework to address human factor issues. More importantly, starting with the requirement to develop a sound human factor policies and defining the role of leadership. This paper has highlighted significantly the role of leadership in the company, because the leadership shapes the culture within the company. So intentionally, this paper is structured in such a way that the expectations are implemented in the phased manner, allowing companies to understand and adopt its progresses. So I think the message is very simple. I mean, here the paper, first of all, I think good thing that we have put something on the paper for the people to look at it, understand it, absorb it, and then look into the implementation of that. And we are not expecting that some miracle should happen overnight. I think this can be achieved in the phased manner, starting from level 1 going up to level 4. So Rachit, the human factor management self-assessment paper highlights a lot of what's, as you know, and obviously there is a need to be translated into how's. So it will be a good thing to explain how this can be achieved, Rachit.
Thanks, Captain Rahim. So human factor management and self-assessment paper brings a systemic approach for a company to work on not only the personality assessment of an individual, but it also provides a direction for strengthening its systems and processes. I'll just record what Ian said a while ago, a quote from Edward Demings in his book, Out of the Crisis, which says that a bad system will beat a good person every time, which is so true. Because in a real world, errors would occur. But the important is how to analyze these errors to identify root cause that leads a person to react in a way he reacted, leading to an error or incident. Therefore, to ensure that each task is properly identified, understood, planned, and well executed, it is important for us to analyze an interrelation of a person which is at the center of a task. His or her relation with the work environment he or she is working in, people assisting him or her, procedures and processes he or she is using, at the time of the task, equipment is operating, and organization which is supporting him or her to conduct the task. So it is very important that when we are defining our procedures, our systems, we take into consideration all these interrelations. So let me bring in Ian again. And Ian, with your expertise and involvement with human factor, how you see human factor has helped to improve performance in the past?
Yeah, thanks, Rachit. And I think I'm going to use another analogy here. And one of the best adopters of this philosophy, because it's really a different perspective. It's looking at something this, we could see something 1,000 times, but we look at it through this lens of human performance, and something very different shows up in how we manage our tasks. The automobile industry back in the 50s and 60s, there was a certain amount of deaths on the road. And back then we didn't have seat belts and good signage and lighting, and the cars, they're very different to what we are today. Now, the amount of people that are on the roads has increased significantly, the distance we're traveling and so on, yet the amount of fatal accidents tends to be about the same, because their approach to managing that wasn't to focus on the individual and make them better drivers. Whilst that's still a good practice, they focused on the system. They focused on everything that surrounds that driver and put seat belts in and airbags and ABS braking and so on, and helped with that understanding that people are going to make mistakes. And so if they're going to make a mistake, let's help them fail safely. Now, that might sound like a contradictory term, but it's all about how we can help put defenses into our system that can absorb the cost of an error. So when, yes, human performance has a massive impact on the health and safety of our people and of our equipment and on the environment. Yet when we either prevent the error, or we reduce the likelihood that the error is going to occur, or we mitigate those consequences, it has such an impact on so many different areas. Yes, on safety, less people get injured, less damage to equipment in the environment. But if we don't have to do something over and over again because we keep making a mistake, our efficiency goes up, our productivity goes up, the quality goes up. We see massive reductions in rework, which a lot of organizations don't even count. But they start to see huge savings because they do something and they get it right the first time. Again, this is all about making it easier to get right the first time and harder to get wrong. So we see all these different impacts, and it's often put forward as, this is a safety thing. It's not. It's everything. It impacts so many different areas of operations that can have a huge benefit to the whole organization and to the people. Vijay, any comments for yourself in terms of where you see the human factors and the human performance can have a big impact on the operations? Just on mute there.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, here I think we're talking about, nowadays there have been talks and researchers are talking about autonomous ships coming in, and people are thinking that will eliminate the human involvement. So I would like to remind everyone here that when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, to prove the people inside the room that this machine is worth it and can be used, he required a human on the other side to say a hello. So humans are there and they will stay, maybe in some other manner or fashion. So the point is, we need to understand that. And in 1980s, I remember, when I was a child, there was a huge hue and cry when computers were being brought into the banking industry. And they said that when computers come in, they will take away our jobs. But today, we have more jobs in banking sector. Maybe they eliminated some kind of error or mitigated some mistakes which were happening by humans. But the human element has increased, the human factor has increased, So I don't think so that is the answer. The answer is that we need to understand the human factor, and we need to understand that how we can manage it. And this is what is required. And I would like to ask Rob here that why there is a need to apply human factor management properly for it to work, if you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, you know, we've discovered over the years that you can't just throw concepts at people. We find it to be true that if you want to shift someone's paradigm, you have to give them a paradigm more powerful than the one you're asking them to lead. And that means you have to take people on a journey. So what we say is it needs to be done right. I mean, heck, there's now people writing books on how it needs to be done right. Well, for 30 years, we've been saying it's about what you do and what you say, especially as leaders, not just about what you know. It can't ever be about what you know if that doesn't drive behaviors and understanding and tools in the organization. So we've created sets of tools that people can use, because you can't really change behavior without some kind of tool that drives that. And again, Ian's a genius at deploying tools in organizations. And so I'm just going to let him talk for a couple of minutes on a few of the tools that we deploy, and then maybe talk to Ratchet and Vijay on how that shifts over into the maritime industry. So Ian, you want to just talk to us a little bit about tools?
Sure. And I might as well keep on this thread of analogies, and I'll use an analogy of a hockey game or a football game, soccer. And ultimately, the person who's responsible for keeping that ball out of the back of the net is the goalkeeper. Now, we can equate the goalkeeper to our frontline workers. They're the people out there performing the tasks. Now, if in a game of soccer, for example, is the goalkeeper the only person responsible for keeping the ball out of the back of the net? No, we have defenders who try and prevent shots on goals. The midfielders try and transition from defense to attack, and the attackers to try and score more goals. They're not the only ones. The goalkeeper is not the only one to keep the ball out of the back of the net. And there's even more than that. There's the coaching staff and the medical staff, and there's all these other, let's call them layers of protection, all designed to keep the ball out of the back of the net. In the human performance world, those are the elements of the system. These are these layers of protection that we have in place to prevent bad outcomes. Do we want our goalkeeper, do we want our person out there performing the task to be the best equipped that they can possibly be, such that all these other layers of protection fail? They can increase that likelihood that they're going to prevent the shot on goal? Absolutely. So we have these tools that we can use to help equip those people out there in the field to reduce the likelihood that they're going to make an error. You and I and everyone fail at known error frequency rates. And one of the first things that we help people do is to understand what is their vulnerability right now. And there are certain clues and signals that tell us that we're vulnerable and where there's a likelihood that we're going to make a mistake or make an error. From there, we can use certain tools. For example, if I find myself doing a task and I start scratching my head, I now have a gap in my information as it relates to that task at that time. And I can't think my own way out of that. And we help people recognize when they're in that sort of mental mode, as we call it, and go and get some sort of external source of information. We call it stop and seek out help. We've been hearing for years and years and years, whether it's in oil and gas or mining, whatever industry, our people they have a responsibility to stop when something's not right. And then we keep having these bad outcomes. And the thing is, most people do stop, but then they try and think their own way out of it. So we help guide them and coach them on how to go and get that external source of information that can fill that gap in their knowledge. From there, we can coach them on using procedures the right way. We even coach the procedure writers how not to write errors into written documents that increase the likelihood that someone's going to make a mistake out there in the field. And then we can use tools like verbalized point and touch to reduce our likelihood for error even further. We've also got tools that can be used on a group level when we're in toolbox talks or where we're working in a group to reduce the likelihood for error. And then for supervisors to go out there in the field and to engage their people in dialogue that can help bring error vulnerabilities to the surface. All of these tools, we have to give people tools to reduce that likelihood for error. And at the same time, we need processes in place that can highlight where we are vulnerable, where our system, where there are flaws in our system, something we call latent conditions, that if we don't bring to the surface and manage, eventually all those pieces of cheese are going to line up and we're going to have a bad outcome. So we do a lot of work in helping people identify where they are personally vulnerable, but also where there are those flaws in our system, just waiting for other conditions to line up such that we have this bad outcome. Rachit, I might just pull you in here as well. Any thoughts on that for you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. Human management self-assessment do highlight some of the key pillars of human element. And before we talk more on these tools, how these can be implemented to improve performance, I think it's good if I just briefly touch on few of the pillars of human element. So the first one talks about on the company to have they have developed a human factor policy, which highlights senior leadership commitment in defining the culture. Once that is done, the company should develop procedures that are simple and easy to understand so that they can be effectively implemented. Now, these things do provide a base foundation for crew members to work on board effectively. Once this is done, this is time then we can use a lot of tools, as Ian, you have mentioned, which also provides equipment and control to ensure that they are well designed, properly placed, reliable, and well maintained, and also helps to reduce equipment-induced errors. Once this is done, it is important that we start training our crew members to ensure that they are skilled enough to be able to recognize and respond to unexpected and changing situations. So this is the time a lot of the tools, as Ian, you have mentioned, will be very, very helpful for an individual to analyze and to recognize as and when situation is changing as he is performing his task. And the last pillar, again, the important one, is the company should provide adequate expertise to investigate all incidents and look beyond human error and into the systems and conditions that allowed the incident to occur. So these are the important aspects to ensure that we have adequately implemented the human factor within the company organization. Maybe Vijay, you can come in and you can just give some more light, as it's important to understand that practical application should go beyond compliance. So maybe you can throw some of your views here.
Yeah, thanks, Rachit. Yeah, definitely, and practical application is always necessary, but we need to also understand that practical application is possible if we accept something, and we only accept something when we understand it. And to understand that, we need to also take care that human factor is not something which you can read on the papers. It's a process-driven training on human factor, and which needs to be followed so that people understand it, accept it, and then apply it. And that is what is required, for example, the developments will keep happening, the technology will keep changing, and the onset of EGDIS completely changed how we navigate. And we have seen that how it has been done in a phased manner, because here the bridge team was considered as the center of the task-based system, and the human factor was taken into account. And there was a process in which they were trained, and how in a phased manner the ships were converted from paper to paperless. And some of our clients did that, they did it in a manner which was very professional, and whereby they understood that the bridge team on board required a process of training. So this is what we need to understand. Yeah. So Rob, if you can throw some light on the impact of majors in the past with your experience.
Yeah, it's great to be back, and sorry the intro screen went away. I hope everybody can see me. The thing that I got from you guys' conversation, and it's a question maybe I'll just ask Ian for a nod on, is the regulator or the referee plays a role in the soccer match, in the hockey match. But we don't want to base everything we do on the referee or the regulator. So we do have to use that systems approach in our systems management. But we've got to set up key performance indicators that work for us, that actually understand whether we're progressing. And I saw somebody talk a little bit about that systems approach, meaning equipment design as well. So the more standardized you can make equipment design, the better off things are going to be. But the challenge is, if you don't have standard equipment design, you need performance indicators that tell you how you're going to get to that point, because you may be years away from that. So what do you guys think some of the KPIs that might be impacted by doing human factors right? What are some of those key performance indicators in maritime that may be impacted by where you're going with this?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for sharing very interesting views on these KPIs. So, being in the industry for so long, I personally feel that people in the industries, it's not that they were not aware of human factors. I mean, people were aware of human factors, but what I felt was lacking was that need for a proper framework and its practical applications. So now I think we have developed something, the framework, easy to understand, applicable information, so that the people can actually look at it in a simple way and then try to adopt. So I feel that the thinking and the mindset in some companies and leadership need to definitely change, aligning with the expectation of human factor management self-assessment. I also feel that the concerted efforts will be required to develop a sound human factor policy and the management plan. The management plan, I think, which suits you, which works for you. It is not something, you can pick it out from the shelf. I think you need to plan this. The policy need to be designed per your company, and then management plan should suit you. And then setting a monitoring and control responsibility, because what you put in place need to be monitored, obviously. And somebody needs to be having a control and having a responsibilities. Then very important aspect is the personal training, because I think I feel that quite a bit of effort should go into training people, into this human factor. And then, of course, once all this thing is put in place, I think you need to have a proper program to measure and analysis what you have been implementing. Because from that perspective, you can learn whether the things are going right, or whether the system or what you put in place require a tweaking. So I think in the end, the measurement and the analysis of implementation is a very important aspect. So now I'm again looking towards Rachit. The maritime industry probably wants to know how they can get ready and adopt to implementation of human factor marine self-assessment expectation. Rachit?
Okay, thanks, Captain Rai. I think I'll just add on to what you mentioned. Maybe to start the work, I think if we need to put it in a kind of a pyramid, so at the base level, it is important that to begin with, a company's senior leadership develops a sound human factor policy. As you also mentioned, no two companies are same, and so are their thoughts of running the company. So it is very, very important that the senior leadership builds a policy on human factor which is applicable for their company, the size of the company, the type of ships they are operating, the crew members which they have on board the vessel, and in the region which they are operating. So they do take into all these factors and develop a policy. Then once that is done, it is important for them to reassess their management system to ensure that it is simple enough for the crew members to understand and comply during their onboard activities. Again, here also it is very important that they take into account the people who are basically on board the ship and who will be referring to utilizing these management systems. So depending upon their capability, understanding of the language, it is very important that we take into account all these factors. And not only that, also take into account the various safety critical tasks which vessels do very frequently. So take into account all this and ensure that the procedures are adequate enough to ensure that they are easy for their understanding and compliance.
Ratchet, do you mind if I ask a question? Because I think it's important to know that, you know, a lot, even while each company is a little bit different, you can still map, and we've already mapped out all the different attributes of a safety management system and a management system and how those tie to human factors. So you can start with an audit or assessment against what we've known over 300 deployments works, so you know where your starting point is, rather than just trying to, again, reinvent something.
Very rightly said, Rob. And I was just about to add that only, that once the system is done, and again, at this point of time, again, what has happened is that if you go back and look into the human factor self-assessment, they are referring to a lot of things for which companies already have a system in place. Let's say incident investigation. Now, the human factor paper is again talking about incident investigation. But the only new thing there is that this human factor. How are you incorporating that aspect into your incident investigation methodology? And as you rightly said, Rob, it is very important for a company to map their entire procedures against the human factor expectations, which, yes, the job which we have already done. Yeah. Once this is done, it is important then for a company to ensure that the tools which they are using to ensure that the crew on board the vessel, they are adequately trained to understand the concept of human factor, so that they can effectively gauge the changing situations and act accordingly. And lastly, as I said, yes, incidents will occur if you're in the real world. Therefore, it is important that a company relook into their systems of effective root cause analysis and ensure that the system provides sufficient barriers so that they can stop failures beyond human errors. So for the human factor application, it is very important that the companies now give a fresh look into their management systems and ensure that we are not only just talking about more on the on trainings, but giving a lot of emphasis on the systems and controls and conditions. So that is something which we all need to look into. So with that, I would like to hand over back to Justin.
Thank you very much, Ratchet. Thank you, everyone else. This has been really good so far. We've gotten really good participation in the chat and in the questions. If it's okay with everyone, I'd like to go back and start reading those off for you. I'm going to do these in the order of appearance. I've got one that came in 2 minutes after we started. When will the principles of human factor development plan be integrated under the TMSA3 umbrella?
Can I take that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think it is well clear in the paper itself. I think if you look into the document itself, I think it says in the opening para itself that this framework has been developed based on TMSA principles, and going forward, I think the intention is to include this in the TMSA. So when that will happen, I think we do not know. So whenever I think the OCIMF membership decides to sort of include that in the TMSA, or when they do the review of the TMSA 3, probably they will decide to include that in that document. But I think it's a good thing that it is not straight away included into the TMSA 3, because if it was straight away included into the TMSA 3, then the expectation was straight away there that this has to be implemented immediately. So it's a good thing which has happened that this is not currently included in the TMSA, allowing the industry to observe what has been put in place. People can develop the understanding of this document and then implement something before I think it becomes mandatory when we include that in the TMSA. So I think yeah.
That's a great answer, and we also think based on our experience with other industries, there's no better time to do the right thing. So this isn't about the shipping industry, including something that many other industries have already figured out is a good thing to do, and waiting on that. It's about getting ahead of that, so we're doing the right thing to become a more sustainable, less reactive industry.
Great, thank you. The next question I have is similar to the first one. We often talk about TMSA 3 element 14, but does this really exist as such? Has TMSA 3 as a standard been amended? If not, is there any idea when this is expected to become part of the standard?
Yeah, I think that's part of the same answer. That's a great question. And again, what we're trying to do is get ahead of that and say, look, go ahead and learn from these other industries. Let the TMSA run its path, but there's no better time to do the right thing than and start getting ahead of that than now.
Yeah, I think one more thing, I think adding to what he says, I think is that I think it will be inappropriate at the moment to call this as a TMSA element 14, because this has not been included in the TMSA at the moment. But there is an intention to include that in the TMSA, and if you look at the structure of this document, the structure is absolutely based on TMSA, and even the KPIs are numbered as for the element 14. But it will be inappropriate at the moment to call this as a TMSA element 14, because it does not exist at the moment until this is included in the TMSA documentation.
Thank you, Captain.
Okay.
Next up, I have a comment, and I believe this came slightly after we were talking about how a bad system will beat a good person every time. The statement says, one always has the power to choose their beliefs, thoughts, intentions, and behaviors. It is these choices, one's mindset and attitude, that create results or outcomes.
Well, I think that the science doesn't support that 100%. So, for instance, most of the mistakes that we make are not a conscious decision to make a mistake, and that needs to be understood. Part of human factors is understanding what drives elements that aren't a conscious decision or are an error. So, if you really look at Deming's work, if you look at Decker's work, if you look at our work, about 90% of events are actually not caused by somebody who intentionally or consciously did something. They're caused by some kind of systemic driver that drove that individual to do it, and it made sense to them at the time. So you can go, Justin's going to post a link to Fit Online. You can go look at 100 different free pieces of input to take you down the road to understanding what we now know about human error that doesn't fit the old mold of everybody makes conscious decisions. The science on that has been outrun for many years now. And again, that's part of the paradigm shift that has to happen. Ian, do you have anything you want to add on that?
I think you said it spot on, Robin. And again, most people are well-intentioned and
right.
You know, they don't go in there to make mistakes. Very, very, very few people at our sites, on our ships, you know, in our facilities, trying to hurt themselves or others, damage equipment or harm the environment. And so they are well-meaning when they do, even when they do make an error, it's well-meaning most of the time. It's just that the outcome wasn't as intended. And so right. Even though I completely hear what you're saying, and you're right in terms of, controlling the controllables. We do have control over our thoughts and our beliefs and so on. Right. But that doesn't prevent us, still making an error. Most of us make about 3 or 4 errors before lunchtime every day. They just don't often have as bad outcomes as it can on a ship or an oil rig, for example.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Great answers on that. Next up, we have talking about pillars. Would it be natural to have standardization of equipment and systems on ships for ensuring effective human-machine interface? Would this approach be taken in equipment type approval system?
Well, I mean, in other industries, that's what they strive for. And really the closest is the airline industry. But even from airplane to airplane, from an A380 to an A330 to a 737, that's not standardized. So we're a long, long way from standardization. And what we need to do is hope that that's coming and really try to get engineering to be involved in that. But in the meantime, we've got to deal with the human factors that were dealt.
Yeah.
I think go ahead.
Yeah, Rob, I fully agree with you on that. And this is something which is not in our control at this point of time. And that is why it is very important that we have adequate systems and barriers in place to ensure that, any of our crew member, when it goes from one ship, having a different equipment to another ship, we have sufficient barriers in place to ensure that he is adequately familiarized and trained for correct operation of those equipment, and not only just the operation, even the maintenance of those equipment. So that is right. Why effective training is something which is very, very important. Sorry, Captain Rahim, would you like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that one. He said that, we have looked into the harmonization of equipment in the marine industry in the great deal, because I was a part of the work group which in the IMO, which worked on this harmonization of bridge equipment. and there is regulations or recommendations from IMO is there on the harmonization of equipment. So if you look at, I think, the design of the ships from the past to now, I think there is a much more improvement taking into account these recommendations. And going forward, I think it will continue to improve, because this is one thing which was really picked up early years. And I think a lot of work has been done on it. And we can see the result of that in the recent ships, and it will continue to improve in the future.
Great. Thank you, Captain. Next I have, is the mental health challenges also taken into account when drafting the human factor element, or there is a need for a redraft from a different angle, as the scenario has changed after the pandemic, given this is going to live with us for a long time?
I think that if you do human factors right, the incorporation of mental health attributes is already there. If you just rely on creating a safety management system and trying to do, in Australia, there's different mental health requirements that are regulated, but the mental health attributes are in good human performance, human and organizational performance, and how you deploy human factors.
Thank you, Rob. How does this go beyond policy and procedure in the SMS? Certainly, most companies have policies stating that safety culture starts at the top and requires top-level commitment. Following those, it is likely that there are procedures detailing how work is supposed to be done.
Yeah,
so how does this go beyond policy and procedure in the SMS?
Well, policies and procedures are just the start of things. They tell us the direction we're supposed to go and what we're supposed to do. If those policies and procedures at the technical level aren't written right, what some people may not know, there's 25 known error traps that we load into procedures. But if the people that write the procedures don't know that, they're putting the people out there at risk by the way they write the procedure. And then the user has to recognize those. So this goes way beyond just the policies and procedures. In fact, a lot of organizations outside of shipping don't require these attributes to be included in their policies and procedures because they become the way they do business. But we realize that in shipping, it's going to be included in the SMS, but that may drive some of the elements. But you have to teach leadership at all levels what they need to know, what they need to think, what they need to say, and what they need to do differently to get things moving.
Yeah. And another thing, Rob, here is that, and one thing which I've noticed is mostly what has happened is when we are writing the procedures, and whenever we are making any amendments in the procedures, it is always done taking into account the compliance. The compliance is, let's say, industry requirements, all major requirements. But one important aspect which we miss is the operation, is the task itself. So I think it is very, very important now that we take the task which they are doing into account when we are writing our procedures. So that is something which is very important.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Rachit and Rob, sorry, I just want to speak that in these lines, do you think the way we went at Safelanes, by making sure that all our staff are trained they get human factor understanding and training, and depending upon whichever level they were working on, and that is required. It should not be limited that only the ship staff which is sailing has to do it, because it is the entire organization and everybody involved has to understand the human factor, so that it can be implemented in the way the ships are being designed by the people who are involved in designing, or by the people who are making the procedures, or people who are controlling or manning. So that's what I want to know, your input on that, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, we have an entire course on human performance or human factors for engineers and subject matter experts and procedure writing. So how do we approach those things from a perspective that we understand how people may fail, okay? and what do we have influence over, as opposed to what we not have influence over. In one of our next webinars, I know we're running a little bit short on time, but on one of our next webinars, we're going to talk specifically about the difference between individual drivers. I see somebody, people, putting up how humans fail. Everything coming up in the chat are individual drivers, but we also have to take into account the systemic drivers, and those are a lot more predictable. So I hope you'll join us for future webinars, or go on Fit Online, as Justin placed in the chat, and poke around in there and see what some of these are. Look for a topic and insights, and you can learn more about it. Justin, are we do we have any more?
Yeah, we do. I do realize we're about 5 minutes past the hour here. If it's okay with all of our panelists, I'd like to go ahead and keep knocking out. I think we're almost to the end of the questions. And for anyone that can't stay, we will have a recording going out in a few days. Is that okay with everyone?
Sure.
Yep. Sure.
Great. Thank you. Next, we have... Let's see. I lost my place. Bear with me just a moment. Do you recommend HFACS use in incident investigation and root cause analysis?
Well, the challenge with that is it stops too early, and that's been proven time after time. It's a good start, don't get me wrong, but it really doesn't go deep enough into how and why people make mistakes. So we've done this for years, and HFACS kind of came and it was a great start, and now we know just so much more. If you want to know more, go on and again poke around on Fit Online, and you'll see how much deeper it can go. The analysts need to be taught how to analyze human factors problems, not just how to bucket them. So that was a good start, but we know so much more now than we did when HFACS first came out.
Great, thank you, Rob. Next I have, TMSA KPIs include many different audits and assessments, static and dynamic. Would our approach as the industry be to shift to human factor coaching and mentoring rather than overdone internal audits and inspections?
Hope so. It's about education. People need to learn new things. Integration, it has to be integrated into the way you do business, and then sustainability, it becomes how we do business. And those are the three phases that we'll be talking about in future webinars. So absolutely, you're not going to audit your way to success. You're not going to audit your way to excellence. This isn't just about compliance. Compliance is just a small piece. And the reality is, if it's just about compliance, don't do anything now, because TMSA doesn't have it in there. But it's not about compliance. It's about reducing the probability that somebody gets hurt, maimed, or killed, reducing the probability that we have a problem on one of our vessels that could be removed by understanding human capability to succeed and fail. So yes, we're kind of hoping to push the shipping industry to not rely on just audits and assessments, but how you do this differently.
And
Good
also,
answer,
I think,
thank you.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, and also I think, just adding to what Rob said, I think we have seen the success of TMSA, in achieving, I think, what I think we're looking into safety management system, and probably I think we have achieved that, through our audit and analysis of what I think functions or what processes we have put in place. And this is actually helped in achieving the continuous improvement in our safety management program. So you could see the success of TMSA was through the audits and analysis. So the theme of that, I think, will continue with the human factor also, because obviously, if you put something in place, you need to actually monitor it, you need to analyze it, you need to measure it to see how you can learn from there, how you can actually achieve the continuous improvement.
Yeah, and just to kind of tie into that, again, with over 300 deployments, we know exactly what you need to look at. So you don't have to measure everything. You know, Einstein said not everything that can be measured should be. So we take that approach.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. From our Q&A, are policies such as open reporting systems, silent near miss reporting, safety culture, etc., not part of the human factor policy which are already in force as per ISM? How and in what fields will this human factor policy differ?
I think it's going to be the methods that you use. It's going to be the concepts that you fall back on. Yes, it tells you to do that. It also tells you to do great investigations, and we still stop at human error. So, you know, Ratchet, I kind of defer to you, but yes, some of those things are already in there, but they're the what's and the outcomes, not the method. So, Ratchet, I think that's part of the answer.
Yeah, that is true. As human factor, I think, will not add some additional procedures into the management system. It is just what is important is that we need to relook into what we already have in place and just ensure that we bring in the component, the human factor component, as a plugin into all our existing systems and processes. So that is something which is very, very important.
Yeah, that's the integration piece, right?
Exactly.
First, we've got to educate, and then we've got to integrate.
Integrate, yeah. So we should not look human factor as another expectations or something which will come and increase the procedures. It is there something to assist us to refine and improve all our existing procedures and processes what we have in our company.
Good point.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. I've got a comment coming up next. Leadership, as you informed, is for top management. I believe it's at all levels. Leadership is a function which is important at all levels of management. In the top level, it is important for getting cooperation in formulation of plans and policies. In the middle and lower level, it is required for interpretation and execution of plans and programs framed by the top management. Leadership can be exercised through guidance and counseling of the subordinates at the time of execution plans.
Absolutely agree. That's why leader knowledge, leader language, and leader behaviors at all levels of the organization are what drives this to happen. It's not driven by a program. It's not driven by a policy. It's driven by what leaders at all levels of the organization, what they know, what they say, and what they do.
Yeah.
Good point.
So maybe there was a misunderstanding. We're not saying that leadership is only for top management.
Correct.
Right. We're not saying that.
No, not at all.
It is for all levels of the organization.
Correct.
Great. Thank you, Rob. How does onboard master do a self-assessment? And if they do, then how do we define the outputs of that self-assessment?
I think it's very, very easy for masters to do a self-assessment. They do have their SMS, which they have to comply. I think the easiest way to do the self-assessment is to just map the procedures with the operations which they are doing, the steps which they are following. And I think every company has provided one system which is called the master's review is there. So whenever you see any kind of misalignment into the procedures, what you have in front of you, and the process is what you're following, I think that is the best way they can do their self-assessment and provides their very, I would say, important feedback to the company for improvement.
We also have already mapped things out, and based on our experience, we've created a self-assessment that people can use, right? So they don't have to go try to figure out where all this would fit. That's already been mapped out. So that master can use the self-assessment against human factors principles to kind of see where they're at and where they need work.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Here's another comment for us. I really, really like this one. Our industry has made a monster out of ISM. I fear that we will also overcomplicate human factors and completely miss the point of what the new view on safety and human factors and systems safety expects. Do you share my fear? I think we all need to accept and understand basic principles of local rationality and people being assets, people doing what makes sense to them.
So we probably don't share the fear because we've been through it so many times. That's a very warranted fear based on how industries in general and shipping specifically tend to approach things. What we've done is, I don't want to call it a simplified approach, but it's simpler than just creating a bunch of rules. So we've been doing safety differently for 30 years. And the creation of those elements doesn't make you overcomplicated. And, Ian, again, is one of our integrators. He's out there with the people. So I don't want to put him on the spot, but Ian, if you'll just take 1 minute and talk about how, there's a little bit about the journey, and then people start doing it because it works for them.
Yeah, I'll completely echo that. And the biggest shift that I've seen, and I can completely get your fear too, when it's right. driven by the regulator, it will become overcomplicated. If you're just responding to that rather than seeing it as something proactive that can really create a highly performing organization, I can get why there would be fear there. I can tell you once people really start to incorporate and integrate these into their day-to-day, there is a cultural shift like I've never experienced anything else that I've worked with over the years. There is byproducts like trust that gets developed, the collaboration, innovation, these sort of things. Engagement, yeah. Even as far as retention of people, because they're now working in an environment where they feel like if there's a bad outcome, they trust that the organization is going to look at, well, what was going on in our systems that had that bad outcome occur. And it's phenomenal. I've never experienced anything like it before, the application of these. So I can hear the fear, I can understand the fear, but know that if it's integrated properly, if it's the people are educated, then it's integrated properly, you'll only see good outcomes.
And just to add on to that, Ian, yes, if we see our existing procedures, and if we basically look them as per the ISM requirements, what is this? Yes, we have we have seen companies having SMS going to 3,000 pages. So that is something, yes, that is something not right. And if you see that SMS so big, yes, definitely it do give a fear. And that is where this human factor comes in place very well. And whereby first it do guide us or take us to look into our management system, whether they are well defined. In our work on simplifying the procedures, we have reduced companies' SMS by over 40%. And that is what we see the scope, that we have written so many things which is not required to be in the management system. Now, and if we see again human factor as a compliance, yes, companies may end up having, I don't know how many pages again for to demonstrate compliance, but that is not the intent of this human factor management self-assessment. It is just to, as I said before, it is to relook into your existing systems and ensure that you have that human factor component already plugged into your existing system. So we are not looking here to have another bunch of procedures. It is just that we need to see how our systems are. We need to relook what kind of training we are providing. Do we have any training which is talking about on the human factor? So these are things which we need to relook.
And also, I don't want to belabor this point, but I've seen some other things come into the chat. It's not that we don't want you to be fearful that you can overcomplicate it. It's that we've done the simplification in industries such as nuclear, medical, airlines, all of which went through exactly what you're about to go through with human factors. So we can make it as least complicated as possible with the biggest outcomes, because as someone well said, it's the people that are going to tell you how best to integrate it, not some outsider. We will teach you how to integrate, but the people will tell you where it will work the best. And that engagement is what Ian was talking about, in seeing that rapid cultural shift that we've seen time after time after time in industries that, just like you, were going to pull the trigger on something like this, but they understood that if they didn't do it right, they were just going to overcomplicate things.
I think I just want to add to what Rob has said is that because I was involved into developing of this paper, I think so this extensive amount of efforts have gone into making this paper, clarify some of the requirement or expectation in this paper, and extensive amount of internal and external expertise have been used when this paper was developed. And if you look at, I think we tried to simplify the expectation in a very simple form. If you look into the best practices, I think it's very well explained. It is not overcomplicated. I think, if you look at it, in a simple way, I think you know how to actually go about addressing some of those issues. So I think we make it, serious attempts were made to make this document quite simple for people to understand, by putting a lot of understanding of the best practices, the recommendation in that guide for you to formulate the policies and procedures. So I think this is what I just want to indicate, that quite a bit of efforts have gone into developing this document, make it as simple as possible for the people to easily understand what to achieve and what to put in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Captain. I really love seeing the chat pop-ups here. It looks like there's some really good conversation going. Because we are pressed for time, I've got 4 questions left in the Q&A. Let's go ahead and knock out those 4, and then we'll wrap it up for the day, okay?
Sure.
What is the recommended human factor training for ship management companies?
Well, I'll just cover that real quick. We have education for senior leaders. We have education for managers and maritime staff. And we've got education for shipboards. And we work with the companies to figure out how to best deliver that. But understanding things like the task-based system, the essential leadership cycle, and how people succeed and fail is a part of that education. So again, you can go online and look at what all of the different educational offerings are, but we're going to use the same strategy in other industries that have deployed human factors to educate people so that they can then start integrating the concepts into the day-to-day work.
Thank you, Rob. Next up, while the paper gives a lot of references to how companies should adopt human factors in their systems, how does this apply to interfaces? There is no clap with one hand.
Sorry to keep answering, but that's a piece of the education. How do you do that in ways that break down some of the silos that we've seen in other types of organizations? So that's all a part of the education and leader behaviors.
Thank you. All right, 2 to go. Hi, human element is linked to company culture. How do you make these go hand in hand?
Well, so again, I'm going to answer very simply. If you look at culture as an output of leader knowledge, language, and behaviors, you can move culture very quickly. So they are linked directly. And in all of our education attributes at all levels of the organization, we talk about how what we know, what we say, what we do, how we see and manage risk impacts culture. So they're inextricably tied together.
Excellent. And last one for the day. It seems that much of the human factors element relies on soft skills. How can we help our people build and develop these skills?
Again, that's a piece of knowledge. We're not inherently good at what some people call soft skills, but I think Ian would also call them hard skills, in that there's very useful tools that if we recognize our vulnerability, that's number one, and then we do something about it, that's number two, that starts to change very quickly. And I think Ian's experienced people walking out of the class and changing how they handle that. And Ian, I'll just ask you for some input on that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Rob. And human element, human performance is built on a science, and part of that is in how we communicate that and how we engage with our people. So that leader language, that leader knowledge is passed through that, we call it a belt of engagement. And the more we can help leaders engage better, communicate more effectively, have better engaged with observations, with their people, the more that culture is going to get impacted by it. So, soft skills, I don't love the term soft skills, because we need to know them. We need to know how to communicate. We need to know how to work well with one another. So in that sense, I think it's an essential skill as opposed to a soft skill. But yeah, it's a crucial piece of it. Absolutely.
And just to close that out, people don't walk out of this training feeling like they've been soft skilled. I mean, they walk out with some very real tools to improve their performance. So, Ratchet, do you want to close us out? You kind of pulled this team together. And again, Justin is posting some things in the chat. We sure appreciate everybody hanging in there with us. We know this went long, but we feel like this is a great first step towards understanding. And we really invite you to join the next webinars. And what we'll do is back off a little bit on some of the information and engage you a little bit more. So, Ratchet, if you'll close us out, I think it'll be a good day.
Yep. Thank you, Rob. And well, before I close, I would like to thank you, Justin, Ray, to get up so early for this webinar and be here. So thank you so much. I appreciate Ian as well. I know for you to give your time. The whole intention of hosting this webinar was just to basically give a bit of overview insight into what we can expect from this human factor, and also honestly speaking, to take out the fear that this is not something which is will bring more compliances. Rather, the way I see is human factor is a good thing. If I really compare this with the present ongoing situation, with so many viruses and variants coming in, and the Omicron has just come as a good virus. Yeah. So with so many new regulations coming in, I think it is now the time that we need to relook into what we have been doing, our practices, our processes. And human factor is a very good tool through which we can again revisit our systems, our trainings, our entire approach on how we are doing a task. So I think this is a very, very positive change in the industry. And with this webinar and the upcoming 3 webinars, our intention would be to provide more understanding on how effectively we can use human factors into our systems. So yes, please do look for our upcoming messages for the next webinar, which we will let you know soon. And thank you for your participation. In case if you have any queries, please feel free to contact us at Safelanes, at Fischer Improvement, and we'll be more than happy to assist any of your queries. Once again, thank you everyone for your participation, and you all have a good day ahead.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Yeah. Bye.